On a quiet Sunday morning at a small-town diner, an 81-year-old veteran sat quietly, enjoying the calm of routine. His life had been defined by decades of service, sacrifice, and honor. But in a single instant, his world was shattered when a reckless biker struck him in the face. What he didn't know was that his son, stationed nearby with an army unit, would arrive in just 22 minutes to restore dignity, discipline, and justice. If you believe respect is earned and heroism comes in unexpected ways, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment below. Watch this story unfold, because what happens next changes everything. The Blue Star Diner sat at the corner of Main Street, its checkered floors and chrome stools a nostalgic reminder of simpler times. Sunlight streamed through dusty windows, catching floating motes of dust in the quiet morning air. Patrons sipped coffee and nibbled at toast, unaware that the day would soon carry an unforgettable lesson. Henry Caldwell, the 81-year-old veteran, was a fixture of this diner. He carried decades of discipline from the battlefields of Korea and Vietnam, and a quiet authority that came from a lifetime of earned respect. Frail in appearance but unyielding in spirit, he settled into his usual booth, ordered his standard breakfast, and prepared to enjoy a calm Sunday. The hum of motorcycle engines broke the morning's serenity. A group of bikers rumbled into the parking lot, their leather jackets and loud laughter signaling they were outsiders. Their presence immediately shifted the diner's atmosphere from calm to tense. Among them was a young biker, reckless and impulsive, who noticed Henry sitting alone. In a moment of arrogance and misguided bravado, he approached the veteran. The diner's regulars exchanged uneasy glances. They sensed the storm approaching, though no one could have predicted its scale. Without warning, the biker struck Henry Caldwell across the face. The crack of the blow echoed through the diner, freezing conversations mid-sentence. Plates rattled. Coffee cups trembled. Henry remained upright, his face calm but the violation of respect clear in his eyes. The diner fell silent. Patrons stared, unsure whether to intervene. Henry did not retaliate. His hand, steady and deliberate, reached for his phone. A single call was made. Words were minimal, controlled, precise, and understood. 22 minutes. That was all it took for the Army unit to mobilize. Captain Michael Caldwell, Henry's son, commanded a rapid response team trained in precision, discipline, and situational control. The call from his father, though quiet, carried urgency that only required acknowledgement and immediate action. Michael did not rush without purpose. He did not react with anger. He reacted with authority, guided by decades of military discipline and the principles his father had instilled in him. The soldiers under his command understood the gravity without explanation. In moments, the convoy of Humvees and an SUV rolled toward the diner, engines humming a controlled power that promised consequences without unnecessary violence. Back inside, the biker returned to his group, attempting to mock his own aggression. But unease had already settled into their ranks. The room's energy shifted. Conversations halted, forks hovered, and all eyes subtly turned to Henry Caldwell, who sat with dignity untouched by age or pain. The scene outside grew louder, vibrations reaching the diner's floor. Patrons looked toward the windows, uncertain. Then the vehicles arrived. 2 Humvees and a government SUV turned into the diner lot. Doors opened. 6 elite soldiers stepped out, disciplined and measured, their silent presence commanding attention. Michael Caldwell followed, every movement deliberate, his gaze scanning the room. His father remained seated, the picture of calm authority. The bikers stiffened. Confidence that had carried them moments ago now faltered. Authority, presence, and history had arrived quietly, but unmistakably. Michael's eyes locked on his father. A silent exchange passed between them. Restraint, integrity, and preparation for measured justice. The diner's atmosphere transformed. What had been a casual Sunday breakfast became a lesson in honor, courage, and the invisible power of discipline. The bikers understood, perhaps for the first time, that strength is not measured in impulsive violence, but in legacy, control, and the presence of those who uphold what is right. Henry Caldwell exhaled subtly. The storm had arrived, but it did not need words. The silent, disciplined authority of his son and 6 Army soldiers spoke volumes louder than shouts or threats ever could. The convoy moved with precision down the long stretch of rural road. Dust rose behind the Humvees as the sun reflected off the polished metal, casting long golden shadows. Captain Michael Caldwell sat in the lead SUV, eyes steady, scanning every possibility. His mind was calm, but his focus was absolute. This was not a battle, yet the stakes were no less significant. Respect had been violated, and it was now time to restore it. Michael's soldiers followed closely. 6 men trained in rapid response and tactical discipline. They understood the gravity of the moment without being told. Their silent coordination spoke of countless hours spent preparing for situations that demanded both authority and restraint. Back at the Blue Star Diner, the air remained tense. Patrons tried to resume their meals, but the atmosphere had changed irrevocably. The young biker who had struck Henry Caldwell sat frozen, glancing nervously toward the parking lot. The casual arrogance that had carried him into the diner moments earlier had evaporated completely. Then the first hum of engines reached the windows. Customers turned, unsure of what they were hearing. The vibration through the floor grew louder. Conversations halted completely. Some diners instinctively grabbed their phones to record the moment. The convoy entered the diner lot, engines now silent. Dust lingered in the morning sun like a cinematic haze. 2 Humvees parked in front, flanking the entrance, while the SUV stopped slightly behind, leaving room for a clear view of the diner's interior. The 6 soldiers emerged first, moving with silent authority. They didn't brandish weapons, but their posture communicated every necessary message: restraint, readiness, and absolute control. Each step toward the diner's door was deliberate, their discipline radiating outward like a force field. Finally, Michael stepped out. His uniform was immaculate, his bearing calm but commanding. Every eye in the diner followed him, some in awe, others in silent fear. His gaze swept the room, noting every detail: the patrons, the bikers, his father, and the lingering tension. Henry Caldwell remained seated, steady as ever. His eyes met Michael's briefly, a silent exchange that required no words. The father's composure contrasted with the biker's growing unease. They began to understand that the rules had changed. Respect was no longer negotiable. Michael approached the entrance with measured steps. The soldiers followed closely behind, forming a subtle protective line, silent but unmistakably imposing. Patrons held their breath, captivated by the tension in the room. Even the young biker, once brimming with bravado, now squirmed uncomfortably in his seat, realizing the scale of the consequences arriving so quietly. Inside, the diner seemed frozen. Conversations stopped, clattering plates were set aside, and the once bustling room became a tableau of suspense. Michael's gaze finally fell on the young biker who had struck Henry. No words were spoken, only a silent, commanding presence. The biker swallowed hard, sensing the gravity of his actions without the need for confrontation. The other bikers, too, began to recognize the disparity. Their confidence had been hollow, their recklessness exposed. What had seemed like a minor altercation now carried consequences far beyond their comprehension. Michael walked steadily toward the booth where his father sat. Patrons instinctively shifted to give him space, feeling the authority emanating from every movement. Henry remained seated, calm, composed, and dignified. The juxtaposition of his calmness against the biker's discomfort spoke volumes. The soldiers flanked Michael, each step reinforcing the quiet power of discipline. No weapons were raised, no threats were voiced. The room itself seemed to acknowledge the arrival of measured authority. The bikers realized that their actions had provoked a force far greater than themselves, a force built on decades of training, honor, and family legacy. The young biker who had instigated the attack now sat frozen, aware that the world had shifted. What had begun as a simple act of disrespect had become an object lesson in courage, restraint, and the consequences of arrogance. Henry Caldwell's subtle, unwavering composure radiated across the room. The diners, witnesses to the moment, felt the power of presence, honor, and legacy. The arrival of his son and the army unit was more than protection. It was a demonstration of values that transcended generations. The bikers' laughter, the mockery, and the casual arrogance of moments earlier had vanished. In their place, uncertainty, tension, and quiet realization. They had learned something in 22 minutes that no argument could teach. True strength and respect cannot be fabricated. They are earned. and they are enforced by those who live by them. Outside, sunlight streamed across the diner lot, casting long shadows over the Humvees and SUV. Inside, the tableau of father-son and soldiers created a cinematic moment. Frozen in time, a silent testament to honor, courage, and discipline. The lesson had been delivered not with violence, but with the invisible authority of those who embody values beyond reproach. The young biker understood fully that any further action against Henry Caldwell would be met with swift, measured, and undeniable consequences. In that tense silence, the room held its breath, witnessing the extraordinary presence of authority and the quiet power of legacy. Patrons, bikers, and staff alike understood the unspoken truth. Respect is never optional. The diner's atmosphere was electric, yet suffused with a tense calm, as if the air itself held its breath. Patrons watched in rapt silence, plates untouched, cups frozen mid-air. The young biker who had struck Henry Caldwell shifted uncomfortably in his seat, realizing for the first time that his recklessness had awakened forces far beyond his comprehension. Captain Michael Caldwell stood beside his father's booth, the faint morning light casting a sharp silhouette of authority across his frame. His soldiers flanked him, calm, controlled, exuding silent power. No words were spoken, no threats made, yet the room vibrated with unspoken discipline. Henry Caldwell's eyes met his son's briefly, and in that quiet glance was an entire lifetime of unspoken understanding, of honor, courage, and the knowledge that restraint often speaks louder than action. The old veteran's calm presence contrasted sharply with the growing panic among the bikers. Their earlier bravado was rapidly eroding under the weight of presence and legacy. The young biker who had initiated the attack looked around, suddenly aware that his actions were under scrutiny by more than just his peers. Each soldier's posture, every subtle movement of Michael, conveyed a singular truth. Consequences were imminent, and they would not be mitigated by arrogance or excuses. Time seemed to stretch. The diner, once filled with the clatter of silverware and casual chatter, had become a stage for a silent but profound lesson in respect. The bikers could feel it. Their earlier laughter, the crude jokes, and the boastful gestures had evaporated, replaced by tension and the dawning realization that they had miscalculated entirely. Michael's gaze shifted from his father to the young biker. It was not angry. It was measured, deliberate, and suffused, with the quiet authority of a man who had trained to control chaos rather than escalate it. The biker could not meet his eyes. The weight of military discipline, familial honor, and decades of accumulated respect bore down on him with unmistakable clarity. The other bikers, sensing the shift, exchanged nervous glances. The room, now under the quiet control of experienced soldiers and the presence of a respected veteran, had transformed. The lesson was clear. Actions have consequences, and arrogance has a limit when faced with honor and restraint. Henry Caldwell finally allowed a subtle exhale, his hands resting lightly on the table. His posture remained impeccable, a testament to decades of military service. The bikers had no doubt now that they had overstepped, and that the consequences were inevitable. Outside, sunlight caught the polished surfaces of the Humvees, glinting like silent sentinels. Inside, the soldiers maintained a protective yet non-threatening formation. Every subtle gesture communicated readiness, control, and authority. The room had shifted from potential chaos to a state of tense equilibrium, where every movement was observed, measured, and understood. The patrons, silently witnessing the unfolding drama, felt a rare mix of awe and relief. They understood that they were witnessing not just a confrontation, but a profound demonstration of values that transcend age, power, and intimidation. Respect, discipline, and legacy were being enforced without a single raised voice or weapon drawn. The young biker's hands trembled, slightly as he realized the magnitude of his miscalculation. What he had believed to be an inconsequential act of aggression had summoned forces defined by training, family, and honor. Every second stretched, emphasizing the weight of his error and the silent power of the veterans. Presence reinforced by his son's measured authority. Henry Caldwell's calm, dignified presence contrasted with the biker's escalating unease. His eyes, steady and composed, conveyed decades of experience, silent lessons learned on distant battlefields. and a clear expectation. Respect is non-negotiable. The soldiers, aligned with Michael, subtly adjusted their positions. Not in aggression, but in readiness. The young biker now understood that any further provocation would be met with immediate and decisive consequences. The room held a collective awareness that authority had arrived, and that the lesson being imparted was absolute. Michael's gaze swept across the diner once more. Patrons, bikers, and staff alike were aware that the moment had crystallized into a cinematic tableau: honor facing arrogance, experience facing recklessness, and measured authority silencing uncontrolled aggression. The tension was almost palpable. For 22 minutes, an act of disrespect had gone unchecked. Now, with father and son united and supported by disciplined soldiers, the room had become a living lesson in courage, restraint, and accountability. Finally, the realization settled fully on the bikers. Their arrogance, so evident moments ago, had been dismantled not by force, but by presence, legacy, and silent authority. They had learned that respect cannot be demanded by words or threats. It is recognized, earned, and enforced by those who embody it. Henry Caldwell's subtle nod to his son marked the culmination of the unspoken exchange. The lesson had been delivered, the consequences understood, and the dignity restored. The diners, silent witnesses to the scene, would remember this Sunday not for the violence that began it, but for the courage, honor, and measured power that ended it. The bikers, now humbled, understood fully that their actions had summoned not only immediate consequences, but a lasting lesson in respect and restraint. Michael Caldwell's measured authority, the soldiers' silent discipline, and the veterans' unyielding dignity combined to create a moment that transcended the ordinary, leaving an imprint of honor that would not be forgotten. The diner, once a place of casual routine, now held a palpable gravity. Patrons, frozen in awe, slowly began to exhale as they realized that the tension, while still present, had shifted. The bikers, once brash and mocking, now sat in stunned silence, processing the arrival of the son, his soldiers, and the weight of decades of accumulated honor and discipline that Henry Caldwell represented. Captain Michael Caldwell remained beside his father, his presence calm but authoritative. Every subtle movement reinforced the lesson. Respect is not optional. Arrogance has consequences, and honor endures. The soldiers maintained their positions, a living testament to the power of preparation, discipline, and controlled response. The young biker who had struck Henry felt the weight of every eye in the room. His bravado had evaporated, replaced with the uncomfortable understanding that he had crossed a line that could not be erased with laughter or excuses. He understood now that strength was measured not in intimidation, but in the courage to uphold values and in the wisdom to recognize when actions are wrong. Henry Caldwell, steady and composed, finally allowed himself a small smile. It was not one of triumph over aggression, but a quiet affirmation of dignity restored. Years of service, sacrifice, and the principles he had lived by were reflected in this moment. His legacy not just in memory, but actively witnessed by all present. The other bikers shifted nervously, realizing the magnitude of their miscalculation. Their previous dominance had been a fragile illusion, shattered by the calm authority of a disciplined soldier in the presence of a respected veteran. The room, once tense, now carried the weight of a silent lesson fully imparted. Patrons witnessing the transformation began to whisper quietly among themselves. Their awe mingled with relief. They understood that the events unfolding were not just about a single act of disrespect, but about a broader truth: honor, legacy, and discipline command respect in ways that mere aggression never can. Outside, the sun reflected off the polished surfaces of the military vehicles, casting long shadows into the diner. The soldiers remained ready, a subtle reminder that while the immediate threat had been neutralized, readiness and vigilance were ever present. Their disciplined posture reinforced the power of calm authority over reckless force. The young biker who had struck Henry shifted uncomfortably in his seat, realizing that this moment would stay with him far longer than any fleeting thrill of aggression. He had been humbled not by anger, but by presence, training, and the unspoken bond of family and honor. Every subtle glance from Michael Caldwell reminded him of the consequences of disrespect, while Henry's composed dignity reinforced the enduring weight of a lifetime of service. The diner staff, previously tense and unsure of how to intervene, began to regain composure. The waitress who had approached Henry earlier now offered him a gentle nod of respect. Other patrons murmured quietly, acknowledging the power of the moment. It was a scene of profound impact, showing that courage, legacy, and discipline can transform an entire room without a single raised voice or weapon. Michael finally glanced at the bikers, his gaze steady, measured, and firm. He didn't speak, but the message was unmistakable. Any future disrespect or reckless behavior would be met with consequences. The bikers understood implicitly that this was not a threat to provoke, but a lesson to respect. Henry Caldwell took a deep breath, his subtle smile widening slightly. The lesson had been delivered, the dignity restored, and the balance of respect reestablished. The patrons, staff, and bikers alike recognized the significance of the moment. This was not merely a personal vindication, but a demonstration of enduring principles that transcend age, power, and circumstance. The bikers, now quiet and subdued, began to realize the full scope of their actions. Their arrogance had been met not with retaliation, but with the steady, measured presence of discipline and honor. The lesson was clear. Disrespect is fleeting, but legacy endures, and true authority commands attention without ever raising a hand. Outside, the military vehicles waited silently, a subtle reminder that readiness accompanies honor. Inside, the diner's atmosphere shifted from tension to reflection. Patrons slowly returned to their meals, though the memory of the morning's events would linger long after plates were cleared. The young biker who had initiated the incident now sat in stillness, absorbing the full weight of the day. Every glance at Henry and Michael Caldwell reminded him of the consequences of arrogance and the power of integrity. His companions, similarly subdued, now understood that strength is measured not in aggression but in courage, honor, and the wisdom to recognize one's limits. The room, once disrupted by a single act of violence, had transformed into a testament to the enduring power of respect. Henry Caldwell, his son, and the soldiers had conveyed a lesson that would be remembered far longer than the initial shock of the assault. It was a story of courage, discipline, and the unassailable authority of honor lived fully and witnessed openly. Finally, the diners began to relax. Conversations resumed quietly but with a newfound respect for the veteran and his son. The bikers, humbled, remained seated, silent witnesses to the undeniable truth that some forces, those built on discipline, legacy, and integrity, cannot be challenged without consequence. In that small-town diner on a Sunday morning, the ordinary had become extraordinary. A moment of disrespect had been transformed into a demonstration of enduring values, leaving an indelible impression on all who had witnessed it. The morning sunlight streamed through the diner's windows, casting warm golden hues across the tables. The intensity of the past 22 minutes had subsided, but the lesson lingered in every corner. Patrons quietly reflected on what they had witnessed, a demonstration of courage, discipline, and legacy that transcended the ordinary. Henry Caldwell, still seated at his usual booth, sipped his coffee slowly, savoring both the warmth and the calm. His hands, though aged and lined, rested with quiet dignity on the table. He had been tested, and the outcome had reaffirmed not only his personal values but also the lessons he had spent a lifetime instilling in his son. Michael Caldwell remained beside him, standing tall yet relaxed, his presence a protective anchor. The soldiers had begun to exit the diner, their movements calm and deliberate. No words were needed to convey the unity, discipline, and authority that had ensured the day remained under control. Their silent exit reflected the subtle power of measured action, the assurance that the situation had been resolved, without unnecessary escalation. The bikers, subdued and humbled, now fully comprehended the consequences of their actions. Their arrogance had been dismantled not through threats or violence, but through the steady presence of integrity, honor, and legacy. Each glanced toward Henry and Michael, a silent acknowledgement that true strength is rooted in respect and discipline rather than recklessness. The diner's patrons, some still clutching coffee cups and half-eaten plates, began murmuring quietly among themselves. Conversations were now infused with reverence and reflection. What had seemed like an ordinary Sunday had become a living lesson, a story that would linger in memory for years to come. Witnesses understood that courage does not always roar. It often arrives quietly, deliberately and decisively. Henry finally stood a subtle but powerful gesture that captured the essence of the morning's events. His slight nod to Michael conveyed gratitude, pride, and recognition for the disciplined, measured response that had restored dignity. Michael returned the nod, a silent affirmation that the values of courage, honor, and respect had been upheld. Outside, the sun continued its climb, illuminating the parking lot where the Humvees and SUV had waited. The soldiers departed without fanfare, leaving behind the quiet proof of their presence. Their exit was as composed as their arrival, a reminder that true authority operates without spectacle, relying on integrity, discipline, and quiet vigilance to ensure justice and respect. The young biker who had initiated the incident now sat frozen, the weight of his misjudgment fully apparent. Every detail of the morning, the disciplined soldiers, the unwavering presence of Michael, the quiet dignity of Henry, left an indelible impression. Humility, respect, and awareness had replaced arrogance, leaving a profound understanding of consequences in its place. Other bikers exchanged subtle glances, a mixture of shame and realization evident in their expressions. The lesson of the morning was complete. Disrespect cannot withstand the quiet power of integrity, honor, and measured response. True strength is not demonstrated by reckless actions, but by courage, restraint, and the ability to uphold one's principles in the face of provocation. Patrons slowly returned to their meals, though the diner itself seemed changed. Each table carried the memory of what had unfolded, a testament to the enduring impact of a father and son, backed by discipline, training, and the unspoken bonds of legacy. The Blue Star Diner, ordinary in appearance, had become a stage for an extraordinary lesson. Henry Caldwell's subtle smile returned, faint but unmistakable. He had lived a life defined by service, sacrifice, and quiet heroism. Today, his legacy had been reaffirmed, not only by the presence of his son and soldiers, but by the acknowledgement of all who had witnessed the events. Respect had been restored, dignity upheld, and courage silently displayed. Michael Caldwell, observing the subtle changes in the room, the humbled bikers, the reflective patrons, the quiet nods exchanged, understood the profound nature of what had occurred. Discipline, legacy, and honor do not always require words. They command attention through presence, action, and principle. The lesson delivered would resonate far longer than any single act of violence could have. As the diner gradually returned to its routine, the memory of the morning's events lingered. Patrons shared quiet remarks, recounting what they had seen, while the bikers sat silently, fully aware of the repercussions of their actions. The quiet strength of Henry Caldwell and the measured authority of Michael and his soldiers had transformed a reckless incident into an enduring demonstration of values that mattered far more than any momentary aggression. In the end, the Blue Star Diner stood as more than a building. It became a symbol of courage, integrity, and the timeless lesson that respect is earned, discipline commands attention, and true authority speaks volumes without a single raised voice. Henry Caldwell and Michael shared a final glance, one of understanding, pride, and silent affirmation. Their morning together had delivered a message far larger than themselves. In a world too often dominated by recklessness and impatience, the principles of honor, courage, and legacy remain unshakable. And as the diners gradually returned to their meals, and the bikers quietly exited in subdued reflection, the lesson was clear. Some moments do more than pass. They resonate, teaching values that endure far longer than the fleeting consequences of aggression. This Sunday morning at the Blue Star Diner would be remembered not for the strike that began it, but for the presence, courage, and honor that restored balance and dignity, leaving an indelible mark on all who bore witness.